How wonderful it is to relax by the sea. Fresh air, a light breeze, seafood, or perhaps a cruise, the calm expanse of blue water, new cities on the horizon, cocktails with those little umbrellas. What could be better? The sea feels like an eternal constant, a source of peace and tranquility. It seems it has always been that way, but it wasn't. In the late Middle Ages, people perceived sea voyages quite differently. They were dangerous, and no one could guarantee that you would reach your destination safely. The sea we now associate with rest and calmness was once tied to danger and madness. Among 15th century mystics, it became a powerful symbol. The soul as a fragile skiff abandoned on the infinite sea of desires, in the sterile field of cares and ignorance, among the mirages of knowledge, amid the unreason of the world. A craft at the mercy of the sea's great madness, unless it throws out a solid anchor, faith, or raises its spiritual sails, so that the breath of God may bring it to the port. Later, in the 17th century, the melancholy of the English were easily explained by the influence of a maritime climate, cold, humidity, the instability of the weather, all those fine droplets of water that penetrated the channels and fibers of the human body and made it lose its firmness, predispose it to madness. This wary attitude toward the sea also extended to those who sailed upon it. Sailors did not come from the solid land with its solid cities, but indeed from the ceaseless unrest of the sea. The sea was often imagined as swarming with monsters, whales, dragons, sirens. Sailors were believed to be in constant contact with these devilish creatures, and many thought that no one could survive at sea without striking a bargain with the devil. The belief that sailors sold their souls for a favorable wind was widespread across Northern Europe. In Scandinavia and the British Isles, tales circulated of captains purchasing bags of wind from witches or even from Satan himself. Sailors, for their part, were notoriously superstitious. They trusted in signs, made offerings to the sea, and carried charms and talismans. To the church, such practices looked like paganism or outright witchcraft. As a result, the image of the sailor as a cursed man, suspended between life and death, God and the devil, endured in popular imagination for centuries. As early as the 15th century, stories were told in the Netherlands and Germany of ghost ships doomed to wander forever because their captains had made pacts with the devil. These tales laid the groundwork for the enduring legend of the Flying Dutchman. Ghost ships may not have existed in reality, but there was something equally strange: ships full of madmen, known as ships of fools. These bizarre drunken boats glided along the calm rivers of the Rhineland and the Flemish canals, carrying their insane cargo from town to town. Where did they come from? In the late Middle Ages, the mad often lived as wanderers. The towns drove them outside their limits, so they were allowed to wander in the open countryside. The custom was especially frequent in Germany. In Nuremberg, in the first half of the 15th century, the presence of 63 madmen had been registered. 31 were driven away, and in the following 50 years, records show 21 more forced departures. Frequently, they were simply handed over to boatmen. In Frankfurt, in 3099, seamen were instructed to rid the city of a madman who walked about the streets naked. In the first years of the 15th century, a criminal madman was expelled in the same manner from Mainz. For some sailors, this became an odd side job. However, sometimes the sailors disembarked these bothersome passengers sooner than they had promised. One blacksmith from Frankfurt was expelled by boat twice, returned twice, and only on the third attempt was he carried away for good. Often the cities of Europe must have seen these ships of fools approaching their harbors. It is not easy to discover the exact meaning of this custom. One might suppose it was a general means of extradition, by which municipalities sent wandering madmen out of their own jurisdiction. A hypothesis which will not in itself account for the facts, since certain madmen, even before special houses were built for them, were admitted to hospitals and cared for as such. Moreover, throughout the Middle Ages and Renaissance, most European towns had a place of detention reserved for the insane. Madmen were thus not invariably expelled. The banishment of madmen cannot be explained only in terms of social utility or public safety. Their wandering, their embarkation, and their departure carried meanings far closer to ritual than to mere pragmatism. For example, although canon law did not deny the insane access to the sacraments, churches often barred them from entering. In 1421, Nuremberg witnessed the expulsion of a mad priest, carried out with unusual solemnity, as though his madness, joined with his sacred office, made him doubly impure. The city even recorded in its budget the money given to him as a viaticum, a kind of ritual farewell. At times, the expulsion took on the air of a public spectacle. Certain madmen were whipped in the streets and in a grotesque game chased in a mock race beyond the city walls, bitten along the way with quarterstaffs. These acts suggest that the exclusion of the mad was not just a matter of convenience, but part of a broader pattern of ritualized exile, a symbolic cleansing of the community. To hand a madman over to sailors was to be permanently sure he would not be prowling beneath the city walls. It made sure that he would go far away. It made him a prisoner of his own departure. Yet, water adds its own weight of meaning. It carries off, but it does more. It purifies. Navigation delivers man to the uncertainty of fate. On water, each of us is in the hands of his own destiny. Every embarkation is potentially the last. It is for the other world that the madman sets sail in his fool's boat. It is from the other world that he comes when he disembarks. His journey is both an exclusion and a passage in the fullest sense. Confined on the ship from which there is no escape, the madman is delivered to the river with its 1,000 arms, the sea with its 1,000 roads, to the great uncertainty external to everything. He is a prisoner in the midst of what is the freest, the openest of routes, bound fast to the infinite crossroads. He is the passenger par excellence, that is, the prisoner of the passage. Alright, you have taken a few madmen aboard your ship, but where should they be brought? The question is not as simple as it seems. In fact, there were gathering places where the madmen, more numerous than elsewhere, and yet they were not native to those towns. First come the shrines. Pilgrimages to these places were organized, often supported by cities or hospitals. It is possible that these ships of fools, which haunted the imagination of the entire early Renaissance, were pilgrimage boats, highly symbolic cargoes of madmen in search of their lost reason. Some went down to the Rhineland rivers toward Belgium and Gile, others sailed up the Rhine toward Jura and Besançon. Interest in cure and in exclusion coincide. Madmen were confined in the holy locus of a miracle. It is possible that the village of Gile developed in this manner, a shrine that became a ward, a holy land where madness hoped for deliverance. But not all destinations were sacred. Cities like Nuremberg were certainly not shrines, and yet they contained great numbers of madmen, far more than the city itself could have produced. These madmen were housed and provided for in the city budget, and yet they were not given treatment they were simply thrown into prison. It is likely that in certain important cities, centers of travel and commerce, madmen were brought in considerable numbers by merchants and sailors, and then lost there, thus ridding their native cities of their presence. This curious phenomenon found vivid expression in art and literature. The image of the ship became especially popular in German-speaking lands after the publication of Sebastian Brandt's satirical book Ship of Fools, which later inspired Hieronymus Bosch's famous painting of the same name. Brandt's work portrays a vessel crowded with fools, each embodying a particular human vice: greed, pride, hypocrisy, ignorance, lust, obsession with wealth, and more. Instead of steering toward wisdom or salvation, this ship drifts aimlessly toward Narragony, the imaginary land of fools. Through this allegory, Brandt offered a biting critique of the moral and spiritual corruption of his age, targeting not only common people but also scholars, clergy, and rulers. Much has changed since then. Humanity no longer sends the insane off to wander on ships. So if you happen to be a ship captain, you're out of luck. This side business is long gone. By the 17th century, attitudes toward madness began to shift. The ships of fools disappeared into oblivion, along with the image of the madman endlessly adrift between worlds. Madness was no longer imagined as a fugitive force cast out upon the waters, but something to be contained, observed, and controlled on land. The wandering vessel was replaced by the stationary institution, the hospital of madmen, the madhouse. And that's the story of the Ship of Fools, history's weirdest cruise line. No refunds, no Wi-Fi, just a boat full of people who probably needed a therapist. There are more fascinating stories from history waiting for you. Join the next voyage.